there is a hierarchy, and there are the inanimate things, and then there's the plants, and then the animals. And in the Quran, interestingly enough, everything worships God. And God say, but لا تفقهون تسبيحهم, you don't understand their prayers. But in one part it says the birds worship God, the trees worship God, and so everything that is on this earth worships God. And even the shadows, have you thought about it before? And this is where Peter Pan becomes very religious, when his, like, hi, shadow, come here, and he's trying to get him, and then Wendy sews on the shadow back on. It's as if the shadow has an independent reality. So your shadow also has an independent reality, because even if you refuse to prostrate yourself to God, your shadow is prostrating all the time. So, so everything inanimate even is bowing or, worshiping God in its own way. And in the Quran, this world that we live in is called Duniya, in the bottom of the slide. So this, and Duniya means that which is close or that which is low. And funny enough, people call their children Duniya in the Arab world because it also means the world. So it has like this nice meaning on the one hand, but on the other hand, they don't realize like Duniya means something that's really low. And then Akhira, on the other hand, is the next world, and also it means that which will last. So one is fleeting and passing, and one would be there, khalidina fiha. Okay, so in the understanding, in the Islamic understanding, is that people enter this world as dead things, and then, but that kind of death is not absolute, it's a relative death, and then again, no one but God is alive, and God gave you this life, and God, of His 99 names again, is Al-Muhyi. He's the one who gives life, and Al-Mumit, He's the one who takes life away, and He's Al-Hayy, He's the one who's alive. And some of these names are common than others. So now, by now, you know the word Abd. Was that explained to you? Abd, or slave. And in Arabic, like, we have lots of names, like Abd al-Kabir, Abd al-Karim. And there are two famous things that in English get sometimes not clearly understood. So Abd, like in Abdullah, the slave of God, the worshipper of God. Abd al-Haq, for example, would be the worshipper of, the real one or the true one. Abd al-Karim, or with one I instead of E, two E's, that is the, the slave or worshipper of the generous. And some of the names are like Al-Mumit, the one who causes death. I've never heard anybody call that, but these are very popular male names. And Abdullah is the name of the father of the Prophet Muhammad, and it existed from the time of pre-Islam, which shows that, again, Allah was, the God, the main God, even for the polytheistic Arabs. And so this is Abd. The other thing, since we're talking about names, sometimes they call people Abu so-and-so, and from that comes again in Aladdin, Abu, but Abu means the father of. So when you see, so this means the father of, and this is the worshipper or slave of. Go sit down. Oh, we'll lecture like this. This is very romantic. Okay. Okay. So there is in the Quran, in chapter 2, verse 28, God is addressing humanity and saying, how can you be ungrateful toward God when you were dead and He gave you life? Then He will cause you to die, then He will give you life, then you will be taken back to Him. So the whole thing is working, like, be grateful, because first of all, we take it for granted. I'm here, I'm alive, I am, therefore I exist. Okay, fine, but where did you get that existence from? So here are the stages of life, non-existence. We don't know whether, we were alive, like our souls were all, like did God create like a number of souls that He was going to send down at one point, maybe, because there is the idea of the covenant in the Old Testament, and also it is mentioned in the Quran that God took from the back of Adam his progeny and then asked them, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your God? And they said, yes, indeed you are. And then, So maybe, people have the idea that, souls are already created in heaven, and then God sent them to earth at their appointed time, and that the babies, the first 40 days, they are in their own little world because they're still in communication with the angels in the realm of the divine. And then we come and live in this world, and then there is death, physical death, but that doesn't mean that after death that everything else doesn't exist. So and the majority of Muslims believe in the life in the grave. Some people feel like, no, the Quran doesn't have indication of that, but there's a whole tradition, and Al-Ghazali wrote about it, the idea of the life in the grave, and then finally the day of judgment, the return, where there will be resurrection in physical form, and then there will be eternal life, either in paradise, in the garden, or in hellfire.
So what's the life in the grave again?
Well, I'll explain that again in more slides in a second, and if it's not satisfying, you can ask again. So again, before creation, that death is not actual because it hasn't happened. And then once we're living in this world, our life is relative. And it's not really pure life because it's a mixture of life and death in the sense that we sleep and then we wake up again. And God is the only one who does not sleep, so his life is unmixed with death. And لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. He doesn't blink for even 1 second. He's always up. And we should try to ignore all diversions. And person who's standing here smiling, go sit there. Okay. As I said, there are 2 kinds of death mentioned in the Quran. The real death, when God finally takes the soul and doesn't give it back, while every day when we take a nap or we sleep, it's like a mini death, where your soul also travels and goes to God. And that's why they say don't wake somebody really quickly, because their soul needs to be reckoned and summoned back to come to their body so they can. So next time you're waking somebody up, remember that there is a journey of a few milliseconds until their soul comes back. And but then the real death is when the soul leaves. And of course, we've all heard of stories where somebody was in an operating room and they went through, their heart stopped for a second, and then they thought that they saw the beyond, and then they came back. And okay, so death is measured out just as life is, because it's brought by God and God alone. And in other words, it's predestined, it's known when people would die, but at the same time, it doesn't mean okay, since I have no control over that, I'll go out and do whatever, because still your life is a trust, and you have to take care of that trust to the best of your ability, because death cannot be predicted or anticipated. Because I remember in 5th grade, somebody in my religion class asked the teacher, why doesn't God tell us when we're going to die? And the teacher said, so that you didn't live your whole life recklessly and then suddenly a few days before you repent. But, so nobody knows when their time will be up. So here, coming back to the grave, in this kind of idea that, the grave is important, is that the grave is the first step towards the next world. And it's said that the angel who comes and blows in life into the human being, like in the in the womb of the mother, when a person is, first pregnant, also writes down the person's term of life. So it's determined from that moment, and this is in the 4th hadith in the book that you're carrying around. And so that brings us, of course, to free will versus predestination. But again, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop caring. You always have choices, so do the best. It doesn't matter whether you have a 5-minute role in the play or a whole hour, but do your best. Act it all out as best as you can. And if you decide to stop and care, then that's a choice that you also made. And so everybody's death is determined for them, even if they commit suicide. And of course, that brings out many problematic questions of, okay, so if God is the one who predetermined that person commits suicide, why should God punish that person? And of course, yes, God says that whoever willingly commits suicide, that then they'll be in a bad place. But then maybe somebody, has lost it, is in a, sick, mentally sick, people who are mentally ill are not responsible for their actions, so we cannot judge people. So if somebody commits suicide, you shouldn't say, oh, he's condemned to hell right away, because we don't know. We don't know what the circumstances are. And at the same time, Islam does not condone violence, nor does it condone committing suicide. So, when always my students ask, oh, those suicide bombers, they think they're going to paradise, they think they're martyrs, and they say, no, the majority of the population doesn't think that, and people think if you commit any horrific act, then you'll be punished by God, because even harming a cat could lead, to a person being punished, so how could you harm human beings, and especially if they are innocent civilians? So suicide is a no-no topic in Islam. Okay, so again, that's inevitable. Nobody knows when their time is coming. And the angel will come and take, the person's soul when their time is up. The name that's, Muslims usually refer to as the angel of death is Azrael. And it's not mentioned in the Quran by name, but he's mentioned as the angel of death. And it's not clear whether there is one angel of death or there is many angels of death that every person has an appointment, in the same way that you have an angel writing all your good deeds on your right hand, an angel writing all your bad deeds on your left, whether you have an appointed angel that will come when a person's time comes. If we were to follow this thinking that, once a person dies, they're taken to the grave and then something happens. Actually, what happens in Islam is like what happens in Judaism is when a person dies, they're washed right away and they are buried right away. So if they die during the day, they usually are buried by sunset. If they die at night, they're buried the next morning. So there isn't this period of waiting like happens for people to come and have the wake and all that. So it's a quick thing that happens, and the reason is, they need to go to the grave because they need to know where their place is, whether it's heaven or hell. And it's out of respect, to the dignity of the person who died. So they wash them, they shroud them in the shrouds like the 2 shrouds that men go on pilgrimage with, and then they bury them theoretically in individual dug graves, although over the years in different cultures, different things have happened of how they bury the dead. But when I was little, my mom would go to funerals and come back and say, oh, so-and-so was so skinny, but their coffin was so heavy and they were refusing to go to the grave, and so-and-so was so fat, but their coffin was running to the grave. So people take that as indication as this person was really good and they can't wait to go and, be in paradise, and this person is like, oh my God, so they weigh so much. But once they reach the grave, they are in a state known as Barzakh. So this is, I guess, like purgatory or whatever. It's a place where, there is waiting. And supposedly in the first night of the grave, 2 angels come to the deceased person, and they give the names given to them is Munkar and Nakeer. And they ask people questions. Do you believe in God? Who was your prophet? What did you do? And if you answer the questions correctly, then the grave would be made into a comfortable place, heavenly place, and if not, then everything the person hated, be it snakes, spiders, whatever, would appear to them in their wait. So, but there is, this is not from the Quran, so not everybody, people say probably when people die, they'll just be asleep until the day of resurrection happen. But most Muslims, I haven't talked to a Muslim before who doesn't believe in the day of judgment.